Hey, so I have 10:02 now. I'm going to start because we just have a quick introduction with C-Clear, and we want to make sure that Natasha has enough time to walk us through fluxx, and we can still answer some questions towards the end. My name is Sebastian Harrison. I'm with the Center for Creative Land Recycling. Our mission is to promote the sustainable, equitable, and responsible use of underutilized and environmentally impacted properties. And we are the BTAP, the Brownfield Technical Assistance Provider for US EPA and DTSC, both for this grant for the state of California. Here are some of our services. I think, judging from the audience of this group, many of you have attended a webinar or a training from us before, but we are available for one-on-one technical assistances. We put on workshops and conferences. And really, as we move forward in this stage of the grant, if you see the next slide, you should have a Brownfield Technical Assistance specialist assigned to your project. So that will either be myself, Ignacio, David, or Janet. And we're here to help DTSC and yourself, on this next stage of the grant and, the remediation life cycle of the project. And I'd just like to mention that we are also thinking about, round 2 of the ECRG. So if there's other projects, that you see as potential or other interested parties that to please connect them and to start getting those conversations going. Just underneath the team, also joining us on this call is Devin, a project administrator with C-Clear. Tony, I'm not sure if he's with us today, who's one of our outreach managers, and Natalie, who's the program manager for the ECRG. So today's speakers and with us from DTSC are Mary Ann, the statewide Brownfield Development Manager, Jennifer Black, the branch chief of grants and program support branch, who may not be speaking, but will be available to answer any additional questions. And then lastly, but not leastly, Natasha DiPietro with DTSC, who's the professional geologist and the fluxx architect and has been working hard behind the scenes to connect all these different pieces of the grant management software and the ongoing work. So before we get started, we just wanted to begin with a couple poll questions. So Devin, if you could launch the poll now. As sort of discussing with John, it's important that we make sure everyone gets paid, right? So keeping the 15,000 minimum in mind, and this refers to the batch amount that DTSC is looking for the first invoice. How soon do you, the grantee, will you be ready to submit your first reimbursement request? Now that you're able to begin the work and begin the period of reimbursing those invoices, what is the time frame that you're looking at? So we'll just give a minute here for the responses to come in. And I'd just like to mention as well, I know everyone here is connected with the ECRG program, but if there are any other interested parties you're working with or anyone that you want to share, the link to our newsletter is right in the chat now for reference. Okay. So looking at the results, we really do have a hodgepodge. It seems like there's going to be some invoices coming in very soon for reimbursement, as well as people, pushing it out, 6 months. And I think it's important for you to sort of map out this payment process and understand that, the invoices that you're sending to DTSC need to have the grantee name on them. So perhaps there's, a parallel payment process that the grantee needs to start, with their contractors as well. So I think it's important to understand those and in terms of your payment terms. Okay. That being said, the next question, Devin, if you could launch it. The DTSC will not allow grantee project management labor costs to exceed 5% of the grantee award amount. And we've talked about this before, but have you developed an internal process to track and anticipate these costs? And we're sort of asking this as a leading question with regards to the first question. Thinking about that invoicing batching, have you designed a process to reimburse for that 5% project management while making sure that you're not going over that max amount? So we'll just give that another second. And it's looking like a pick 'em. Right now it's at 50-50. Okay, great. Thank you everyone for participating in those questions. I'd like to encourage you to think about a process for tracking those 5% PM costs. Especially it could just be a simple spreadsheet with regards to all of the invoices from the contractors, but I think it is important to anticipate early before there's any issues. With that said, I'm going to stop sharing and hand it over to Natasha for a walkthrough of fluxx and some slides that she's prepared. Thank you all.
Thank you, Sebastian. Good morning, everyone. So as mentioned, this training will be recorded. And additionally, a slide deck will be available afterward with all the information we provide to you today. So with that, we'll go ahead and jump in.
Oh, yes. And I also just like to quickly mention, Natasha, I forgot that we will be doing Q&A at the end of this webinar. But if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And, one of the specialists from the team can either respond to it now or we can address at the end of the meeting.
Thanks, Sebastian. Okay, so when you guys are ready to submit your first reimbursement request, what you'll do is you'll go to the application portal, dtsc.fluxx.io, and you'll log in using the same credentials that you used to submit your grant application. So if you don't remember your credentials, if it's been a while, you can always reset by clicking on this link here to reset your password. So be sure to check your spam folders if you don't receive an email right away. And very worst case, if you don't receive an email, you can send an email to us at applicationportal at dtsc.ca.gov, and we'll assist getting your account reset. So I'll go ahead and log in. So this should look familiar to the majority of you. When you log in, you'll end up on the landing page. So from here, you will use the navigation pane on the left to navigate down to reports. And then you'll click on the cost reimbursement form underneath reports. Once you're here, you'll see that you've got one record, and you can go ahead and enter edit mode, which is similar to what you had to do when you guys were completing the applications. So you'll find a blank form ready for you to complete. So one thing I'd like to remind you is that the portal does not auto-save. So you're going to want to click on save and continue frequently while you're working on your request to make sure that your work is saved. Another note is for those of you with multiple awards, you'll want to make sure you're submitting against the correct site because if you have multiple awards, you'll see multiple reports here at once. So make sure to verify the grant ID matches and it's the correct site. So now going through the form that we'd like you to use to submit this request, we've got a few instructions here. Some basic information. Each reimbursement request must be 15,000 or greater. The number of invoices submitted that's listed under the summary cost should match the number of invoices uploaded in your single PDF. And there's more about that later. And then some other instructions on how to use the portal. So the first section that's showing here is a read-only section that's reserved for DTSC feedback if action is required, or if an invoice or invoice batch is rejected. So this will only apply to you after your request has been reviewed and if the reviewer has either identified changes that are necessary to process the request, or will provide reasons why the entire request was rejected if that happens. So this is where you'll find those details. We'll talk more about that specifically later in the presentation, but I just wanted to point that out. This is a read-only section for that. So as you scroll down, the first section you'll see is grant information. And this just lists the grantee organization, address, the executed grant number, the grant period, and the awarded amount. You'll note that the beginning of this grant period is the first day that expenses are eligible for reimbursement. The next section on this form is the site. So the name or names of submitted sites will populate for you. In the case of investigation or cleanup grants, there should only be one showing. So you can go ahead and copy and paste that field, the correct site into that field if your reimbursement request pertains to one of those specific sites. So in the example of community-wide assessments, there will probably be many cases where it does not apply to only one of these sites. And in that case, you can go ahead and enter community-wide assessment into the site field. So the next thing we're asking for is the submitted invoice date range. And this should encompass the dates for all activities that are being requested for reimbursement. And again, make sure that this date is not before your grant period. The next section after that is payment address. So we'd like you to enter the full mailing address, including street, city, state, and zip for the cost reimbursement, where the cost reimbursement check will be mailed to. One thing that's very important to note is that the address that you enter here must match the address that was submitted on the standard form 204 or 205 when your grant agreements were executed. If it does not match, the request won't be processed and it'll most likely cause a delay in your reimbursement. Okay, moving on, we are into the summary of costs. So this is the section where you'll provide information related to the reimbursement request total and additionally provide a breakdown of that request total. So as mentioned, 15,000 is the minimum. So you'll enter your total request amount, which could include one invoice or it could include multiple invoices. And you'll see that the next question is asking how many individual invoices are being submitted as part of your batch. So next is a breakdown. We'd like to know a breakdown of the costs that are included in your reimbursement request. So we've provided this, the following specific categories. The first is regulatory oversight fees. The next is environmental consultant contracts. So this includes all expenses that are incurred by the environmental consultant. The next section that we've put here for you is environmental investigation and cleanup contracts that are not incurred by the environmental consultant, so perhaps are directly billed to the grantee. Next, we have community engagement contracts, grantee project management labor costs, grantee project manager travel, and other. So if any costs are input into the other category, we ask that you do provide additional information in the format of other, short description, and then the amount so that we can understand what those costs encompass. So just for example's sake, I'm going to enter some amounts to show the next thing that we'd like you to double check. So you'll see as you add the totals in for this amount, it automatically calculates your totals here. And we'd like you to make sure that the breakdown matches the amount that you requested as your total in the beginning. If not, you'll see the difference calculated for you here. So if that's the case, you can go back and fix that to make sure that this is showing 0. So the last step for the reimbursement request is to provide your invoices or your invoice or your invoice batch as a PDF, as one single PDF. When you upload this, we'd like you to title your document using the following format, which is year, month, date, -ECRG agreement number, -invoice. So we've got an example for you here. And this functions in a similar way to the way the document uploads functioned in the application. So you'll click on this, you'll add a file. Click Start Upload. And then the document will show up under Invoice Upload. So once you've completed the form and uploaded your invoice or invoice batch, you'll need to exit edit mode by clicking Save and Close. And then you'll be able to submit using this button at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. So once this reimbursement request is processed by the DTSC portfolio manager, another blank form will be added to allow for additional invoice or invoice batch submittals. So now I'm going to take a second to switch screens, and we'll talk a little bit more about invoice requirements, the overall DTSC process, ineligible costs, and what happens if your request requires further action or is rejected. Okay, so now I'm sharing a slide with you that has some basic requirements for the invoices that are submitted with your reimbursement request. So as we've mentioned a couple times now, there's a $15,000 minimum amount requirement. And as grantees, you should ask your contractors or vendors to provide their invoices to you for submittal, and they must be on company letterhead and addressed to the grantee organization that was listed on the Standard 204 form. They must provide enough detail for DTSC to determine if costs are reasonable and if activities were eligible. Specifically for labor costs, DTSC requires that the following details are included on the invoices as well. So it's the performed project work time frame, classification, work activity performed, number of hours, and associated hourly rates. Just a reminder.
I'm sorry, this is Miriam. Do you mind if I jump in real quick?
Yeah, please go ahead.
So one of the things I wanted to mention, and I know we've talked about this a lot every time we have mentioned invoices, is that the invoices do not have to have been paid in order for you to get reimbursed by DTSC. But of course, that is a matter of like negotiating your terms with your individual vendors, because DTSC won't be able to pay for any fines. So we do encourage everyone that if you don't have the cash to front the expenses and need to wait for us to do the reimbursement, just make sure you have those conversations beforehand, so everybody knows that you have the grant and the cost and the invoices will be paid. And another quick point I wanted to make, and Natasha just kind of walked you through what we're asking for, what level of detail that we're asking for on the invoices. So please feel free to share like this specific slide with your vendors so that they know the level of detail that's going to be required for them to give to you in order to move your reimbursement request through our process as quickly as possible. Back to you, Natasha.
Thanks, Miriam. Okay, so the next slide is similar. So this slide pertains to grantee project manager labor costs and the information that will be required to process this reimbursement request specifically. So it needs to be on grantee organization letterhead and should include the same level of detail that we're requiring from the contractors or vendors as well. Again, I'll remind you that grantee project manager labor costs may not exceed 5% of the grant award amount. Okay, moving on. This is an overview of DTSC's reimbursement process to give you an idea of how how the reimbursement request will move through our process. So the first thing is gathering invoices totaling 15,000 or more, submitting them through fluxx. The next step would be a DTSC portfolio manager review, checking for ineligible costs and just making sure everything is accounted for. Next will be a DTSC accounting review. And if all approved, the check will be issued from the state controller's office directly.
And Natasha, I'm just going to jump in once more here, if that's okay. This is
Sure.
Miriam again. We just wanted to share with you the different steps in this process so everyone understands why time is needed for us to get these checks out to you. It is the process. DTSC as an organization does not issue the checks. That actually comes from the state controller's office, as Natasha's planning. And so, question I've heard is that can the payments be made electronically, which obviously makes sense to us, but we don't control that process at all. That is a completely different state organization. And that's why it's really important that the information that you have completed in your standard forms is correct. If there ever is a situation where there is an address change, it's really important that the forms be updated beforehand, because once again, all of our accounting is based on getting you a hard check mailed to a specific office. And if we are ever in a situation where a check is mailed to an incorrect address and has to be stopped, that actually takes it takes quite a long time, and it is a very sort of difficult and arduous process. And so we'd rather not go there. And so I just want everyone to be reminded of and be very mindful that this is a process that is not within our control. It is what it is, and we are dealing with hard checks. So just keep that in mind.
Thanks, Miriam.
You're welcome.
Okay, so you'll likely recognize this list of ineligible costs from the guidelines. So it will be available in this slide deck as well. If there's questions about the eligibility of an activity, please reach out to your DTSC portfolio manager. But we wanted to highlight some of these common ineligible costs. Okay, so this slide, it's a little busy, but this is basically the instructions of how you'll need to reconcile if your request is sent back to you, or where your request will go if it is rejected. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we had a section that's reserved for DTSC feedback. So in either case, whether it's sent back and action is required, or if your request is rejected, you'll receive an email from the grants management portal, which is an automatically generated email from fluxx. And it'll let you know whether or not action is required and what that action is, or if the request was rejected and why. So if action is required, you'll log back into the portal and you'll navigate to the action required section, and you'll be able to view the same notes that were provided in the email. You'll see them in the request as well. So you'll access the record the same way you would a blank form. You'll edit the form and you can make the requested changes, and then you'll be able to resubmit. If you have any questions about the action required or why a request may have been rejected, you should reach out to your DTSC portfolio manager. Okay, lastly, we'll talk about how to add additional users that will be able to submit these reimbursement requests on behalf of a grantee organization. So if the user is not currently registered in fluxx, ask them to visit the homepage, dtsc.fluxx.io, and register there under the grantee organization. So internally, we'll connect the new user to the organization, and they should be able to view, edit, and submit a reimbursement request. If the user is already active in fluxx, but for some reason does not have access to the correct organization's homepage, shoot us an email to applicationportal@dtsc.ca.gov and we can link them together. One thing to note is that this way of linking will not provide the new user access to the grant application or grant documents. So if that's what you need to be specific in your request, in your email request to us. Otherwise, it will only allow them to submit reimbursement requests on behalf of that organization. So this last slide is a contacts page, and that concludes the presentation. We can move into Q&A now.
Excellent. Natasha, if it works with you, I'm just going to read some questions from the chat that popped up as we were working through.
Great.
One of the first questions was regarding fluxx access. If we weren't the ones to submit the application, but are the finance contact for the grant, can we set up a profile and link to the grant? And I guess if you could just explain how you do that or add additional users to the fluxx system, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so that's the information on this slide here. So if their role is just to submit reimbursement requests, they would just register as a new user and make sure that the organization that they enter here is the same organization as the grantee. That will allow them access to the grantee homepage, and from there they should be able to access the cost reimbursement forms.
Okay, great. If DTSC provides feedback notes on an invoice, will the grantee receive an email from fluxx, or do they have to check the system periodically for updates?
They will receive an email, an automatically generated email from fluxx. But I would suggest that, you know, as we have growing pains and as we're building this program out sort of together, you know, to take a periodic look and just make sure that there isn't anything in there, but it is set up so that an automatic email will go out to the correct user.
Great. I think that'll be very helpful. I'll just make the common disclaimer that it goes to some people's spam folders. So make sure to check that, or, you know, change where those emails from fluxx end up.
Yes.
Okay. Next question from Lauren. Can the entire project management amount of 5% be used if the entire grant amount is not used?
Yes. This is Miriam. I'm going to go ahead and answer that question. We struggled with this. In fact, Natasha and I were talking about this very question this morning. The project management amount is based on 5% of the amount of your award amount, basically. Now, we understand that some amounts may be underspent. We also understand that some projects may expand or have the opportunity to expand in funding if we have funding available. And we were struggling with how to chase that. So I think that we're trying to figure out exactly on fluxx how to make sure that you guys have a hard number. And so we'll put that up, I think, on fluxx at some point. But yes, the answer is yes. And then we'll also at some point give all of our grantees that fixed number that we calculated. Simple, but we'll just have it there so everybody knows what number is the one that we're using that you shouldn't exceed. So I hope that answers Lauren's question.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. Another question, again from Danielle. If we have contractors providing project management related help, do these costs go under grantee project management labor, since it's not technically grantee labor? So this question is just asking if you could further clarify how to break up project management between contractors and consultants and the grantee.
Sure. Natasha, can you go back to your 2 slides that talk about the invoices, please?
Yes.
Okay. So this slide basically talks about all of the requests, the funding requests or the reimbursement requests to the grantee from their vendors, consultants, and contractors. So this process is just for any cost that is not directly from the grantee's organization. And if you go to the next slide, this is the number where the grantee, this is the grantee staff. So this letterhead is going to match the grantee's letterhead. So basically, contract labor is different than project management labor. So I hope that answers Daniel's question.
Okay, thank you. And, you know, will follow up that there is a recording of this presentation. We'll make sure that the questions are followed up with in a typed up answer as well. Here was just another specific question regarding the address that needs to be submitted with requests. Does the grantee need to submit the same address with every request?
I think the answer depends on if they included multiple addresses on the 205 form. But otherwise, I believe if only one address was provided in the standard forms, every request would need to have that same address on it.
Thank you, Natasha. I think that's a helpful clarification to tie it back to that form. Here's just a flux functionality question from John. Can a reimbursement request be saved and submitted later? How does that work?
Yes, absolutely. So when you're working in the system, you'll notice towards the bottom of the form, you have a save and continue button. So when you're in edit mode, you have the option to either cancel, which will get you out of edit mode, but won't save any of your progress. You can save and continue, which will leave you in edit mode, but will save your progress, and then save and close will do just that and save your progress and exit you from edit mode. You don't need to click submit when you first start working on the form, so you are able to come back and go back into edit mode to finish the request and subsequently submit.
Excellent. I think that'll be very helpful because this could certainly take a couple, sessions to make sure that you're ready to submit.
Sure.
Next
Right.
question from Michelle King. Can the work activity performed be a description of the key tasks during the invoice period or a day-by-day description? So just, asking for some additional clarification on the work activity performed.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that. This is Miriam again. And Natasha, thanks for getting to this slide, because that's exactly what I was going to ask you to do. We don't want to sort of over-regulate this or create a cumbersome process. And for us, it comes down to this third bullet: sufficient details to allow the DTSC project manager to determine that the costs are reasonable and compliant with the terms and conditions, and the costs are eligible. And so whatever level of detail that you feel is going to help us be able to evaluate the invoices that are provided to us, we'll leave that for you to decide. We're looking at it from a couple of different perspectives. Of course, we want to be able to review the invoice. We want to make sure it is in compliance with our terms and conditions. And obviously, Jennifer is very conscious about future audits. And so everything that we have has to be able to be, auditable and justifiable. And so the level of detail, Michelle, I think that's really going to be something that you'll have to figure out for us. We're going through growing pains, as Natasha mentioned. This is, it's the first time for you, but it's also the first time for us. And we think that once we review the first batch of invoices and get a few under our belt, we may provide some additional guidance and some additional updates on this presentation. But we actually have to kind of get a few reviewed and paid before we get there. So for now, we're keeping it broad.
Thank you, Miriam. I'd like to give the chance for Leslie to ask her question, just because I didn't fully understand the second part of it, and I thought she might be able to better ask it than myself. Leslie, are you on the line?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. I was
Um,
just wondering if you could ask your question regarding project management and the exempt employees piece.
I'm wondering if DTSD has an Excel file or some format where we could track our hours and tasks. We have a few exempt employees. So can I assume that it's okay to assign an hourly rate to their work, or I guess perhaps a prorated rate to their work based off of their like total salary for the year and their benefits?
Yes, I mean, that's also something that you'll have to figure out. Natasha, you can go back to the next slide, the one after this that yes, see, so it's the same list. This is what we need, what work was performed, when it was performed, what is their classification, what do they do, how many hours they worked, and then that hourly rate, that's up to you to tell us, because you have a limited project management budget as the grantee organization. And so, how you manage your burn rate on that, it's, that's something that you are going to have to figure out. So I don't have specific feedback on how to make that change and what rate to give us, just as long as it's something that's reasonable and passes the giggle test.
Miriam,
Mhm.
the only thing is their documentation for paying that employee has to match it.
You're right, Jennifer.
So I just want to note that. So it can't be something they just assign that's reasonable. It has to
Yeah.
actually match the documentation they give us.
Yes. Yes.
Because they're not just giving us a summary. They have to give us proof that they paid the employee and it has to match.
Okay.
Okay, and just there were a couple questions. Will this material be posted to the DTSC ECRG website?
Yes.
Yes, it will, and we are very close to launching the ECRG grantee resources page. Anthony's working on that. We actually had a preview of it this morning, and so this is going to be, I think, one of the first pieces that we post to that new website. So it should go live hopefully by the end of next week.
Great. Next, a question from Ha Lee. Are there instances where a grantee can submit a draw that is less than $15,000? For instance, their final invoices or trailing charges after they've already batched the previous invoices.
So certainly for the final invoice, for sure. And then if there is any compelling need for whatever reason to do something that's a little bit smaller, that's a discussion to be had with the portfolio manager. So, we understand if there's like a big amount of work that's gotten done, and now there's a lag before a cleanup system is in operation, before the next charges come through. So we understand that there may be situations where maybe not quite $15,000, but there's going to be the need to pay it. So those are questions that we will take through our portfolio managers on a case-by-case basis and make decisions. And the biggest reason for the $15,000 is just because we have to manage our resources, and because as Natasha has shown on that chart, there's so many people who touch this. We just have to be sort of mindful and careful of the way we manage our resources. And that's why we have that 15,000 number there. But there are situations even outside of the final invoice where it's something that we can consider, but you must have that conversation with your portfolio manager ahead of time and get pre-approval for that.
Great, thank you, Miriam. Here's a clarification from John. Is it correct that all the invoices or checks for invoices are sent directly to the grantee, and the grantee distributes individual checks to the consultants, contractors, and balances to grantee administrative service?
Yes, that is correct. The name on the agreement that was signed for ECRG funding, that is the name which the check will be issued to, and that grantee will then go ahead and use that to make all the payments.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. Noemi, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. Are you available to ask it? Ask it over the mic right now?
I am, but in the meantime, I figured it out. My apologies.
Well,
Okay,
never apologize for figuring things out. That's very exciting.
No, when we first looked at the funding source, we thought we didn't understand that 5% was something you would invoice for. So I didn't know if we were talking about two separate 5%.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you figured out that it's 1.5%.
Correct. It's 5%. Yeah.
Good.
okay. Next a question from Vincent, just asking about, sort of what Fluxx is doing behind the scenes. Does Fluxx have a grant fund summary spreadsheet that's tracking the account balance and comparing this versus the grantee's internal account balance?
Yes, so right now we have it as an internal field that is tracking the drawdown, if I'm understanding the question correctly. But we do plan on making improvements to what's visible to the grantee so that you can track and see what payments have been made and what amount is still available for reimbursement.
Great. Thank you, Natasha. Hi, Ping, would you mind asking your question over the mic? I'm just having a little bit of difficulty understanding the specifics of it.
Yes, thank you. So in the previous slide, I forgot which one is just explaining we need to include sufficient detail in the invoice. So so you will be able to determine it's a qualified eligible expense. The question I have in the most of invoice I receive from consultant, usually it does not have enough detail, but it does reference certain tasks, which is listed in our contract between consultant and us. So, and what we do is usually we verify, just look back the contract and make sure this is all in line. What I try to say is without comparing the big contract for you, I understand it's not sufficient detail, but would that be better just for us to add the detail back to the invoice so you will see the more detail? Because I try to bridge the gap, and it may be difficult for us to ask consultant to spill out the level of details you want. So the question is whether it will be okay for us as a project manager to add additional notes and details on the invoice so you will understand.
I have to think about that one because the way we envisioned our process, we would be looking at a batch of invoices from different vendors from the bill to the grantee, and those invoices would directly give us these 5 things that we've asked for labor costs. And from what I've seen, that's pretty standard. If you're saying that, are you saying that your consultant does not give you this level of detail?
Right. They may just reference, for example, tax for, for example, tax for monitoring site soil or something. And I assume that may not be sufficient. And then I would need to go back to the contract to add more detail to that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So your point is about bullet number 3, that work activity performed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's also something that I'm gonna leave up to you. When we are looking at work activity performed, we want it to coincide with something that's been done on the project. Your invoices are going to be reviewed by your portfolio managers and your project managers. So they're technical staff. So they understand, they can look at EnviroStore and they can see, or GeoTracker, and they can see what's going on in the project. And they have the ability to be able to kind of match it one-to-one. Now, if you think it's something that either is written in such sort of vague detail, or if it's something that doesn't match up with any of the work that's been going on in that particular period, then certainly that's something that we're going to need as a note. What I would say is that give us an example and run it by your portfolio manager beforehand, and they can help you make that determination.
Thank you.
Because we would rather deal with it ahead of your formal submittal so that we're not tying up the submittal, and, at least for the first time, and then we can move forward from there.
Okay, great, thanks.
You're welcome.
Hi, Louise. Are you available to answer your, to ask your verbal question?
Yes, I do. Yes, I am. Just a clarification as to John Yonai's question, and you had responded. I was always under the impression that, we receive the invoices and then we pay those invoices, and we also show proof of payment of those invoices as part of our submittal, similar to the way we kind of do the Metro grants. And they request when we submit for reimbursement, they also request copies of the check that we paid the consultants for their work. So I'm a little confused now. It seems like we can just submit the invoices and then get the money and then pay the vendors or the consultants. So I just want to clarify that. Do we pay them first and submit proof to you, or we just submit the invoices and then pay them?
So, Luis, either way, we don't require that the invoices need to have been paid prior to us working on our reimbursement process for our grantees. But we recognize, because we have a window that can range anywhere from a few weeks to 90 days, that there are going to be some issues between you and the people you owe money to if you haven't actually paid them. And so we don't require it, but we are not privy to the terms of your arrangements between your suppliers and your contractors. And so, so that's between you and them. We're just saying that we do not require it like Metro requires it. It's going to be, but the terms of your, the terms of agreements between your vendor may require much faster payment than what we can commit to.
Okay. Just want to make sure. So you guys are just focused on the invoices and the details of those invoices.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Part of that reason for doing that is, especially for some of our smaller communities and our nonprofits, they likely don't have the capacity to float that money. And so because this grant is designed around vulnerable and disadvantaged communities, that was a big discussion in the early days of arranging the terms of the grant. And that's why we landed where we landed.
Okay. Next question, sort of a follow-up from Danielle in reference to the answer given, by Jennifer and Mariam. What is the documentation that DTSC requires to show what was paid an employee?
We would just need something showing the hours, because we have to show when we use money, we have to show how many jobs we created. And so we just need to know, they don't have to have actually received a check yet, but whatever internal records you have, like timesheets. And it doesn't even matter even if it's scanned time cards or electronic systems. In the past, we've had, vendors and contractors who didn't have electronic systems, and we even took scanned time cards, but we do need hours so we can show with this money how many jobs total we've created with all of the funding.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so next question. Does the participant in invoice processing need to be a member of the grantee organization? Can they be a consultant or a partner?
That's a good question. So it doesn't matter to us who actually is the organization that's submitting the invoices. As long as they have that relationship with the grantee. So Natasha, when different entities ask for permission to be part of a specific grant on fluxx, is there some approval process to make sure that everyone asking for permission is tied to the grant?
Yeah, generally, we like to see the request come from the grantee,
Mhm.
or if they're included on the email. But we do like to see proof that, linking someone outside of the grantee organization, it has been authorized by the grantee organization.
Got it. So I hope that answers the question. As long as that authorization takes place, it should be fine.
Yeah, and I'll specify if you were included as a contact on the grant application, you're automatically attached to the grantee organization in Fluxx. So something outside of that, someone that wasn't listed on the grant application, we'd like to see that authorization come from someone within the grantee organization.
Thank you, Natasha.
Thanks for clarifying.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Does anyone on the line have any more questions that they would like to ask DTSC before we conclude?
Hi, this is Steve in Anaheim. Hope everybody's well today, and thank you very much for this training. Greatly appreciated. Question for you on new user access. I've had a couple of my folks submit the access, and they received an automatic reply saying, you'll receive an email from us within 2 business days. They have not received that email. What should we do to follow up in order to get them access?
Sure. Hey, Stephen. So the best thing would be to send an email to applicationportal@dtsc.ca.gov so that we can check out what's going on. Sometimes the approval will go to spam or the link that will allow them to create the password. But if you just send an email to that address, then we can correct that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Of course.
Excellent. Maybe you can put up the contact sheet. Thank you, Natasha. Does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, well, hearing none, I'd like to thank everyone for joining. I think it's been a great session, and thank you, Natasha and Mariam, for leading us through all this information. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.